and particularly in some areas in healthcare, such as OTC. OTC was, very negatively impacted by the COVID-19 situation. And so for people, with a strong exposure to OTC, it's very challenging times. And lastly, on the provision of care delivery, of course, due to the absences of some physicians and to, again, the restriction for traveling, I think that this area, the healthcare services more generally, were very negatively impacted, and we will see that on the share price. So on the page 2, so here we have a view on the share price evolution for the indices on the right-hand side of the page. So you can see that year-to-date, the S&P 500 increased by 4%. But if you look at France and the UK, for instance, there is still a decrease above 20%. So due potentially to the policy decision, to the public policy decision made in the US by the Fed on the Fed side, and also by the government on the public spending side. I think that the US market was able to recover. If you compare these market indices on the right side to the subcategories in life science and healthcare more generally, you will see the outperformers and the underperformers. So not a surprise, the outperformers are in life science tools and in diagnostics. You have also outperformers in biopharma, and as we mentioned on the previous page, it has been more challenging for US care providers and EU care providers. And of course, in life science and in diagnostics, the real winners and the strong increase were contemplated, in companies related with COVID-19. For instance, people developing, a new testing solution in COVID-19, or on the biopharma side, companies developing new medicine against COVID-19. For instance, in France, on Euronext Paris, two of the best performers of Euronext, of the SBF 120 year-to-date, were Sartorius Stedim and bioMérieux on the diagnostic side. Of course, these returns are not only explained by the COVID-19 situation, fortunately, and of course the company performance, as I said, the public policy decision have also a deep impact on this share price. So what is the impact of this share price on the follow-on offerings and capital raise contemplating in Q2 and Q3? So that's the next page. So on the next page, I think it's one of the quite positive and impressive, feedback from this crisis is what happened in May and June. In May and June, you had, more than 40, you had in May 40 follow-on offerings on NASDAQ, and in June 46 follow-on offerings on NASDAQ. For a total amount, an aggregate amount in May are above higher than 7 billion and higher than 4 billion in June. So a real recovery after, the very challenging situation in February and March. And if you have a look at the right-hand side of the page, you can see that there have been more than 8 follow-on offerings higher than $500 million, and 2 out of these 8 being, generated by Moderna Therapeutics. So again, very impressive situation after the recovery of the share price. But we have, I think it's going to be comments, and I think that the other people will elaborate and comment about it. But it's important to highlight that there are many differences among biotech, and it's probably more challenging for the early stage one and for the smaller one. As you can see, on the cash runway on the left-hand side of the page, the cash runway is quite challenging for the biotech with a market cap lower than $500 million. And it happens that this biotech are frequently also, the early stage biotech. So early stage biotech, it's quite challenging for them to get finance, but of course, very easier for the larger ones and for the people which are not too far from, a commercialization.
Well, thank you very much, Frédéric, for this very highlight. I think it was important to have this overview of what the market has done, and I'm sure you will have some questions. For those people in the audience, those who are not physically present, I think you can always put question in your chat room, and then those questions will be relayed to us during the session or at the end of the session, so do not hesitate to ask. So I think we move to the next speaker, and I don't see Laurent Lévy from Nano Biotechs. He was on the screen earlier on. And because normally he should be the one to speak now. Can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. We don't see you, so maybe you can put your cam on so that people can enjoy you speaking.
It is on.
Okay. All right. So
can you see me?
So let's go. That's it. We can see you now. That's perfect.
Okay.
So the floor is yours, and just tell us when you want to pass the slides. So the first slide, please.
Yes, I only have one slide.
Oh, you don't. Okay. So the floor's. There's no slide? You don't have any slide?
I should have one.
Should have one. Okay. So there should be one.
But that's okay.
Okay.
I don't need a slide.
Go ahead. Yes.
So our company is a late-stage clinical company. Is it possible to get the mic because I hear a big echo? Hello? Yeah. I still hear it. Do you have other mics or not?
No, we can hear you very well.
Yeah, I can hear very well.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I can't hear myself. There's a big echo. Hello?
We can still hear you.
Yeah, but I can't hear myself. I have a big echo.
They are trying to sort this out.
Okay, no problem.
Nevertheless, maybe in your, I don't know. Yeah.
Hello? Okay, I'm going to try to do it like this. So if I understood correctly, we just have a few minutes to present the company and what has been the impact of the COVID, or do you want to go first around talking about the company, then you make another round talking about what has been the impact of the COVID?
Yes.
Yes to what? What's the question?
Yes. You go ahead. Sorry. No, I think you have to say yes, the impact of the COVID on your company, and I know that you've got something to say, that a few examples on what happened, and it has been an accelerator in many ways for you.
Okay. Just to be clear. Okay, guys, so sorry for this inconvenience and this technical problem. So I'm Laurent Lévy, I'm founder and CEO of Nano Biotechs. So this company is dedicated to make a change in cancer treatment, and hopefully what we want to have is an impact on millions of patients. And for that, we're developing a compound that is made to be used with radiation therapy, which is a widely used tool in oncology. And now we've been achieving a number of things as we have a global development program going across US, Europe, and Asia with 15 clinical trials. And we also got the first market approval for the first indication. So that's about the company. Now about the COVID impact on our company, that's been for me two very big parts. The first one has been obviously the impact on the clinical trials, where we have seen a stop, let's face it, across the countries, across the US, Europe, and Asia, recruitment has stopped in most of the clinical center. Now it's getting back a little to normal, but it's still not what it was before. So it's not about this that I'm concerned in terms of clinical trial, about the potential impact of what's going to happen for the coming months and coming years. Especially for big clinical trials where we have endpoints to look at, it's going to be complicated to make sure and ensure that those endpoints are correctly read over time. So if we have to do it, we will need to adapt. And I know that there are some discussion ongoing with the FDA and different regulatory agencies to look at this particular aspect. So for me, that would be a concern, but something we're working on. On the other side, the positive part is that all this crisis for us as a company has accelerated things. It has accelerated the transformation of the company. And I think I did mention that the other day. We went from people being good to be even better, and people being not that good being not good at all. So it has been an easy pathway for us to transform the company and to take the best of us. So I'm positive for the future, and we are more motivated than ever to kill cancer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurent, for this few introductory comments. I suggest we move to Hugues. Hugues Bulto from Universals, who is...
Hello.
Yes, we can,
Good afternoon.
we can hear you. Good afternoon.
Wonderful. So let's speak about
Universal. We can't see you yet, but we can hear you very well. That's it. We can see you now. And
Wonderful.
You've got some slides, I suspect.
I don't have any slides.
You don't have any slides, so perfect.
So no supporting material. So let's speak about Universal. So let's start with the mission. So the mission is called Biologics for All. So you may anticipate that it has been very important in the COVID-19 crisis, where a lot of people were speaking about affordability of future vaccines, but also potential affordability of treatments with monoclonal antibodies. So Universals is currently an industrial holding with 4 subsidiaries. In summary, we are commercializing equipment. We are developing a portfolio of vaccines. We have a CDMO specialized in viral vectors, and we have a company focused on low and middle income countries to potentially tech transfer technology and perform decentralized manufacturing. So the vision we had was to create value by disruptive innovation at the level of the bio process. The origin of the company is very interesting. We have had this idea during the pandemic of 2010, so the H1N1 pandemic, when it was obvious that the low and middle income countries would be deprived from influenza vaccines. And so, and we at that time we had the idea to get prepared for the next pandemic. So you may imagine that the COVID-19 crisis was a kind of a vision transformed into reality for the good sides, but also for the bad sides. So our best achievement as a startup, so the company has been started in 2013. The best achievement is to get a funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for an amount, a cumulative amount about $30 million. So that has led us to the development of disruptive manufacturing platform in the name of Nivoline and Skelix. And when I say disruptive, it allows decrease of COGS and CapEx with a factor of 5. In terms of the latest fundraising, and they happened during the COVID-19 crisis, we have raised 50 million for our equipment subsidiaries with KKR. thanks to the support of BDC, the company led by Mr. Polica. So thanks a lot, Christian and team. And we have also raised an additional slice of 50 million with a lead investor called Adjuve. So you may notice that the crisis has been quite beneficial for us in terms of fundraising. So the theme around the COVID-19 crisis was the affordability in quantity and in price, as I told you, for vaccines and for potential monoclonal antibody treatments. So it was clear that we may offer some solutions to the market. So what I will retain as a memory from this crisis is indeed my business development team composed of 80 people, 8, sorry, working 7 days out of 7, and trying either to sell manufacturing equipment, to co-develop vaccines, and to offer manufacturing services for the people who had vaccine candidates. Till now, we haven't signed anything, which is quite disturbing, because you may have noticed that only the big companies have already concluded agreements with the EU or manufacturing agreements. I'm quite positive that within the coming weeks, we will sign 2 or 3 manufacturing agreement for vaccine candidates, for COVID-19 vaccine candidates. And we have developed 2 monoclonal antibodies treatment platform. So what are my lessons learned during that crisis? Essentially, you are never sufficiently connected. So we discover a lot of university during that period that we are now happy to work with. We have discovered also the geopolitical aspect of such a crisis, so the connection with the EU, the importance of our industry with regard to the EU strategies. And so this is really my main lesson, so you're never sufficiently connected. So thanks for your attention, and happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hugues. Was very positive and certainly very useful comments. Any questions from the audience? I didn't ask for the previous speaker, but you can ask also for the other speakers as well. No? Anyway, we'll have some questions at the end. We've got a few questions for you guys. So I suggest that we move to the next speaker. So the next speaker is Haim Fandis, the CMO, Chief Medical Officer of Oxford Therapeutics. Are you online?
Yes, I am.
Good. So you are more than welcome now to start, and we will probably see you. That's it. We see you on the screen. Do you have any slides to share?
I can share my slides.
No, I mean, they have been sent already? No, okay. So,
No, I have not sent the slides.
okay, all right. So
It's more like a discussion.
you can go.
All right. So perfect. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk today. And sorry for not being in Paris, just because of the orders about restrictions. And so, as you mentioned, so I'm Chief Medical Officer working at OBT. And OBT, just a few words. So we are organized in 3 different sites. We have a discovery site that is based in Oxford, in UK. And we have a preclinical site that is based in San Jose, California. And the clinical site that is in New Jersey, or also in the US. So until the end of 2018, OBT was mainly a discovery company. And since the end of, actually at Christmas 2018, so we became also a clinical company where we started really our first in-human clinical phase 1 trial. The talk today, I just wanted really to to organize it in two different pillars, as it was agreed previously. Two strategic pillars. One is from a funding perspective, and the second one is from an R&D perspective. From an investor, so as you know, we are a small company. We are about 35 people, spread towards the three sites in New Jersey, California, and Oxford, UK. And with the COVID-19, it has been really very challenging, of course, to raise money. And the good news in terms of all this bad news about the pandemic, it's that we, as a team, we do best, and it's our really core expertise. It's the discovery of the new targets and new drugs. And maybe at the end of this week or beginning of next week, so there will be some press releases showing another collaboration we are having with the big pharma, and another one that will really follow in the next few weeks. I think really the message here, instead of going and trying to raise money, we focus on what we do best, and doing these collaborations with pharma. So the second pillar is I build it into three different parts: research, preclinical, and also clinical development. And from a research perspective, restriction in people moving here and with the physical distanciation, etc. So we had really to reorganize ourselves and to have access to the lab. We are a small team, and that was really showing when you get into this difficult time, so you get really there is some innovation in terms of how we can work and how we can continue the business with minimizing the impact. So in terms of research for us, in terms for the pandemic, it was really a little impact. From a preclinical side, and that with all the INDs, we have about two INDs that we are submitting next year. So those also little impact of the COVID. Also, we had with the California team, they had to go by turns to the lab and they continue all the assays and the work in order to advance our IND project. And from clinical impact, of course, the clinical impact is different because we have the internal factors or also the external factors. And I think in our phase 1 trial, it's early development, first in human, with 4 sites actually enrolling, all of them in the US. And I think the challenges were the restriction in data monitoring, as many of people really also face, in terms also of patient management, and also the study material supply. There were like limiting factors in terms of delays in providing the materials for the continuation of the study, and also the adhesion of the study requirement in terms of during treatment and also during the follow-up. And I think the big challenges that we faced was in terms of PK for early phase of the development, and also because we are selecting patients by IHC. Our main site, we had the centralized site that was closed in California, and I will tell you how we mitigate those. I think the challenges, and just in terms of the challenges, if I can conclude with the challenges, the degree of the challenges has been really different depending on the phase of the drug development. And I have to say that in our phase 1 trial, the, the, the challenges were really very limited. They were the patient management or patients coming to the clinic to get treatment. So as you know, phase 1 patients, it's almost their last opportunity to be treated. So I think there is that patients coming to the clinic despite the pandemic. And in terms of how we organize the trial, so we just followed really the FDA recommendations, and we limited the PK samples in order to limit the patient to come to the clinic very often or to get really infected either in the hospital or during the travel to the hospital. And in terms of the IST, the site in California closed because there was this the California site, and we were really fortunate to have in-house expertise and capability. So that's really allowed us to continue to select the patients and doing all that work in-house. And really talking to our investigators, there is really some optimism that things will go back to normal. I don't know with this second wave of of the contamination, but really we have been enrolling well, and we have not been really facing any challenges that maybe other companies have been facing or other stages of the clinical development, such as phase 2s or phase 3s, where the demand is more. I mean, there are some strengths not to compromise the clinical trial. That's really all what I wanted to mention, and then I'm very happy to take any questions either now or later on.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this insight and the way you've seen that in your company. There are a few questions already, obviously, on the impact on clinical trials and data integrity, but I suspect we are going to talk this a little bit later. Now it's my pleasure to welcome as well here physically, so Jacques Volkmann, who is head of R&D in France at Sanofi, and he's going to give the testimony of Sanofi in that crisis.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Good afternoon. Good afternoon for those who are on the screen or on the video. So the key word today is challenge or challenges. So what are the challenges big companies, big pharma, and Sanofi as an example, we faced and we are still facing actually, talking about the COVID. So when the COVID is knocking on your door, and this is in December or this is in March, depends when you take the T0. So there is two major questions for a big company. The first one is let's secure actually what we are doing. So we had to secure, of course, our people, our activities, our clinical trials, our productions, our labs activities, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to talk about this today. Just as an aside, actually, post, let's say, 7-8 months, I think we were actually pretty lucky. I don't know if it's lucky, but the impact on our clinical development plan is pretty limited, actually, which is probably different what was mentioned before. The second question, and this is what I'm going to talk today, is about, as a major pharmaceutical company, so what can we do actually to support this, to contribute to this public health issue, and this is what I'm going to talk about. So if we go to the next slide. Alors, being a big player, we have the let's say, a wide range of activities in research and development, in productions, and what we did actually is to look at the whole R&D value chain and see what can we do. So the first piece is obviously at an early stage in research, and we did a bunch of things. So immediately in March, for example, in France, but there was also the same story in other locations, in the US or in Germany, for example. So we had a bunch of activities looking at our compounds, our libraries, our interaction with the ecosystem, and this is why I mentioned consortium actually. So I just mentioned one example, which is in Paris actually. We had obviously some activities to go to preclinical models, and you have an example with monkey models. And to test the hydrochloroquine effect on monkey at an early stage of the disease. But there is multiple examples. If you are interested by this one, there is an interesting paper in Nature actually about this. But we went through a bunch of early stage activities. Again, the question was, okay, can we open doors for future compounds or for future drugs to treat that disease? If you go to the other side of the spectrum, this is clinical research. So we have product in our pipeline, or we have product license, actually. What can we do? And you all heard about chloroquine, sorry. So we went through a number of clinical studies, outpatient, inpatient, so at an early stage of the disease, at a late stage of the disease, and so on and so forth. We did actually more or less the same story with sarulimab, which is one of our anti-IL-6. So that could be an option, actually, to treat that disease. And as you can see on that slide, so we also have collaboration with major investigator studies like Discovery in Europe or Corimmunosari also in Europe. In addition to this, we went through a support to startup, and of course, in terms of cares, Sanofi did quote-unquote a long list of support to hospital and other institutions. I forget to mention, of course, in the research piece, on the consortium piece, some close interaction with big consortium like IMI in Europe or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations for the screening of some compounds. And last but not least, the vaccine, of course, as a big player. So as you know, we have a vaccine division in Sanofi. It was obvious for us to reflect upon this. And in addition to this, early this year, you have governmental bodies knocking at your doors and asking you to develop vaccines. So if you go to the next slide, it's just an illustration. So that was the end of June. This is the number of vaccine candidates under development or under research. This only one thing to keep in mind. This is just unprecedented, unbelievable, and whatever you want to say, but this is something unique actually. So this number has slightly increased over the past 2 months, but it's close to 200 candidate vaccines. And the important piece is the relative percentage of the different approaches. So you see that there is let's say proven technologies on one hand, and of course exploratory platforms like mRNA, for example. You heard a lot about mRNA. And as you can see, and the good news is that because we have this wide range of approaches, the probability of success at the end of the day is higher than, of course, if you go with only a couple of approaches. So that's actually the good news. The bad news is we never know, and until the end of the game, of course, we don't know what will be the winner. So for Sanofi, what we did, if you go to the next slide, so we took actually, and we are working on 2 different approaches. One, I would qualify it as a much more conventional, so it's a protein, a recombinant approach, let's say a classical approach plus an adjuvant, and in this case we have a collaboration with GSK, with a already licensed adjuvant. So we have the capacity, we have the technologies, we have the competencies to actually move this program as quickly as possible. And there is an important piece for vaccine. It's good to have a candidate. It's even better to have the competencies and the technology. It's even better to go into clinic as quickly as possible. But then you need to have the production capacity at the end of the day, which is the case in this particular case. And a slightly different approach, which is on mRNA vaccine. So again, different story, different probability of success, but at the end of the day, we all expect, or at least for Sanofi, that one of our products will make the job and will be supplied in the course of next year. So I don't know if it's the time to draw the line and say, so what are the lessons learned from the COVID period? It's probably too early for big companies like Sanofi. But at least the challenges are still there. There is too many challenges, but we are in good shape. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacques, for this very nice shot on the vaccines and treatment aspects during this COVID period. We've heard already various type of interactions in terms of weather working, in terms of vaccines, all the effort, the joint efforts in this field. I think now we are moving to another domain where there have been some impact, very much heard in the press. And I call on stage Olivier Madec, who is the Global Head of M&A and Venture Investment at Servier, who is going to go through all the supply chain aspects.
All right, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Great. All right. So manufacturing and supply chain. I thought, we would share with you a couple of perspective on how we have actually, lived through the crisis. All of these supply issues are, something that are not very new. They have been going on for a number of years, and the pandemic is sort of, built on a backdrop where production has been continuously outsourced more and more out of France. A couple of data points to substantiate, this fact. Over the past 10 years, France has moved from #1 position to #4 in terms of pharmaceutical production revenues in Europe. Over the past 4 years, there were 315 drugs that were approved in Europe. There's only 25 of them that are actually manufactured in France. That's less than 8%. And so, overall, it feels that pharmaceutical production is a topic that, has an increasing place on the agenda. There is a lot of, discussion currently going on and projet de loi in front of the Assemblée nationale, and that's, I guess, a topic that's here to stay. If we skip to the next slide, I'll be delighted to share with you how we have, lived through all of this. So Servier is a group that has, a manufacturing footprint that's based on a decentralized model. It essentially operate 16 manufacturing sites across the world, ranging from, Far East in Tianjin in China, and all the way, down to Jacarepaguá in Brazil. It's fair to say that we have a pretty significant presence in France. We have about 1,700 employees. We operate an integrated business model. We do have API production site in Normandy, and we do essentially pharma manufacturing in Loiret, close to Orléans. And, be no mistaken, we were hit as far as everybody else during the crisis. And it started early on when our site in Tianjin was actually, shut down by the Chinese government as part of the containment measures. Then it felt pretty much that, COVID was coming home when on March 29, we had a cluster in our main site in GD where about 30 employees were affected. It literally had a dramatic effect on production as our capacity was decreased by 75% for a couple of days. And then essentially most of our sites were hit at some point. We had cluster cases in Ireland, in Cairo, Egypt, in Brazil as well. But for all of these facilities, the impact at the worst of the pandemic was never more than 25% of production capacity. And that sort of leave me with sort of two reflections. And I think the first one was that we had the chance to see early what the effect of the crisis were going to be, thanks to our presence in China. And so overall, this gave us a higher level of preparedness as we got ready to implement specific measures on the other sites. And I think the second observation is simply that through diversification, essentially all your sites are not hit at the same time, and that smoothened very much the effect of the pandemic. If we skip to the second slide, we had a team that we're really proud of and that has worked through a lot of fairly astute crisis management measures that have helped alleviate all of this concern. The first one is pretty straightforward. I think people have been very good at reallocating COVID-19 safety equipment within the different sites. You all know that in the early days of March, getting hold of a surgical mask was something tricky, and without this sort of equipment, we literally couldn't get people to work on site in safe condition. The second point that we worked on was a shift from a 5 to 7 to a 7 to 7, including public holidays production schedule to compensate for essentially all of the decrease in activity that we had seen previously. Another interesting measure is what's something called as a procurement pool strategy. It's a simple concept, but it essentially means that you try to take all the stocks of raw materials and components that you need away from your suppliers and as close as you can to your manufacturing facility. So in case your supplier closed, you can still continue production. And we did exactly the same opposite with finished goods. That's called the push strategy. So every product that is finished, you don't leave it in your facility, you push it in the channel. So in case your facility closed, customers could still get access to the product because there is like a lot of stock in the channel. We did as well a pretty exhaustive reprioritization of manufacturing across all of our products. Our number 2 drug in the portfolio is Deflon, which is a venotonic treatment. And we decided to decrease production of Deflon to free capacity to produce drugs for which a clinical shortage could lead to a potential fatal event to the patient. And there's a couple of additional stories that we were involved with on particularly on 2 products. I think the first one is a product that we've had for a number of years, which is called Victarion. It's essentially a product that's used as an adjuvant treatment for a patient under mechanical ventilation in the ICU. And it's a product that's proven extremely popular in the early days of the year. Obviously, the demand for that specific asset was multiplied by close to 5 times. And so we worked with Pierre Fabre on making sure we could really increase production to satisfy demand. And at this point on this product, we have about 2 years of supply under normal condition and about 6 months under severe COVID conditions. So we do feel pretty good about inventories for that specific product going into the fall. There is a different story as well on Lonsurf, which is a treatment that we have in partnership with Taiho that's used in metastatic colorectal cancer. I think for that one, it was a different story. There was stocks at different level in the channel and different countries. And so we had to work with the regulatory agencies to make sure that we can actually shift stock from one country to another to make sure that patients were still going to receive their treatment. And so we did a couple of maths and deducted that all the measures that were taken have actually guaranteed continuity of treatment for more than 100 of patients suffering from metastatic colorectal cancer. If you look at the right side of that page, you can see the historical supply shortages of the group, which we define as the number of SKUs which are in a supply shortage situation for more than 2 weeks consecutively. And you see that there is some increase going into the sort of April to early May timeframe. But at the peak of the crisis, we had supply shortages on 2.5% of our SKUs. In normal condition, we are ranging in the 1% range. But overall, with all of these measures, I think we've been able to continue supply product to patient, and we really benefited from our setup that was less impacted by the pandemic than for other players. If we skip to the next slide, I think there is a couple of points that are interesting and useful learnings from that experience. I think the first one comes from the idea around patient proximity. I think we've seen the industry shifting to more different models as people were trying to gain economies of scales, and were looking more at centralized system, having like a large production system that will serve everyone. And I guess after what we've seen, people will be a little bit more focused as to asking the question, what are the risks associated with such choices. The second point of learning is around, purchasing. Overall, it feels like local purchasing is more resilient than global purchasing. And so all the trends that we have seen with, people, looking to source API in China and India, as the industry gets a little bit smarter around production, the cost advantage of, source country is something that might not last for, the indefinite future. From finance, another, key topics, all of the companies have, several working capital improvement program that were implemented over the years that has resulted in fairly low level of stock at, various points in the system. The, governments are looking specifically into that point and, having discussion with industry on how we can make sure we maintain secure stock. The other point around supply chain, I think, is broadly a focus on risk management and trying to anticipate low probability events that will have a significant impact. We've seen a couple of them. Brexit was one. China-US trade tensions is another one. COVID, then the first one. It feels like, there are more and more of these improbable events that, tend to happen every other day. From a regulatory perspective, I think that there has been a very good level of cooperation with the various agencies in Europe that have given industry a lot of flexibility around, shifting products, making variations to their market authorization. And I think that, that dialogue and cooperation should continue. And the final point is around digitization in the business. Pharma supply chains are, complex, especially on the distribution side. There is, sometimes many intermediaries, and, the whole topic is about really understanding what's in the system and what's not. And there is, sometimes, limited disclosure from people you work with as to how much stock they're left with and what real demand they need. And so I think that digitization and, sharing all of this data is going to help people really monitor, potential imbalance situation between, supply and demands in this sort of situations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Olivier, for this very interesting presentation as well on this particular aspect. We are arriving to the last speaker, Christian Deleuze, who is with us, who is chairman of the Research and Innovation Commission at the LEM, and he will speak in this capacity. Christian, are you with us?
Yes, I am. I don't know if you can see
Good.
it.
Yes, we can see you.
And of course, I am for some time because it was important, I think, to listen to all these very engaged professionals, because I think that's talking for the LEMs of the pharma industry, for big, medium, and some small farmers. So I confirm that there is some echo, so sorry. I think that the first thing we have recognized is the energy, the ambition, and the willingness of all those professionals to change the curve of this pandemic and of the disease. And based in the LEM, that's the first thing we have realized is that this willingness to collectively feel the sense of emergency and resilience and the willingness to change practice. We have listened to Servier and Sanofi talking about changing their practice. Knowing those big farmers, I can tell you that's not nothing that companies change their practice. So we have, just to take some positive points we can take, or lessons we can take from what happened until now. Concerning ongoing trials, clinical trials, we learned that, in fact, yes, in some of the cases there have been disruption, but we have also seen that in some of the cases there have been tremendous willingness from all the partners to change the rules and keep things going, like European and national guidelines that have some quick changes, ability to deliver the clinical products to the patients and have home deliveries, to monitor from the remote in a remote way. Well, talking about COVID clinical trials, we've seen a lot of private and public partnerships that have been built in weeks, when usually it takes months of years, thanks to e-signatures, transversal committees replacing what is usually one after the other committee, I would say. So altogether, we have seen patients included in clinical trials in 3 weeks, when usually it's more in 7 months. So one of the key things we can have in mind, that's and nothing new, but something that has been really triggered, when everybody wants to make things simple, it works faster and sometimes it works better. The other thing I wanted to highlight is the fact that pharma industry had been one of the first voice to say that while thinking about COVID patients, we shouldn't forget other patients. Because we've seen that there was much less patients going to hospital, diagnosed or treated even for severe diseases such as cancer, for example. And at the moment we see COVID coming back, I think this is something we have to have in mind. We shouldn't forget that we can't only focus our resources and intelligence on COVID, but also think about all the disease we help treating. And that comes to the third thing we can have in mind after this first period, and that was well developed in earlier presentation, which is the fact that in supplies we have been really strategic partners to health authorities, and not only for our own products in revisiting the way we produce in order to avoid shortage, but sometimes because we have the right networks of expert providers in this global world, we were in a better place to help hospitals get their products for reanimation, for example, or even masks at the beginning of the crisis than states themselves. So and there is no order or no importance in the way I said 1, 2, 3. The second thing clearly we've learned is states, European states and France, for example, have now a different vision of healthcare for European patients. A year ago, it was still, and for a long time, seen as a state thing to decide how much a state wants to pay, how to better provide treatments for patients, etc., etc. And we've seen that it has changed. Now we're talking about partnership, strategic partnership with one or several companies buying product in advance, sharing the risk of development, production, and even sometimes potential side effects of the product when talking about vaccines. So we've seen that, again, when there is an emergency, there is a willingness to do the things faster and in a much collaborative way than what we've seen in the past. And even I think, and that's for the good for us, we are seen as partners one can trust. I think that was one of our dreams for everyone working in pharma industry. That's everybody trusts you. Sometimes it's not the case, unfortunately. So going to the last point, the evidence of the importance of data generation. Again, it has been mentioned for monitoring the pandemic, for monitoring the ability of the healthcare system to answer to a pandemic, to evaluate treatments, whether it is repositioning, new treatments, or vaccines. On all those items, we have rediscovered, I would say, we have listened to the fact that we are looking at that imperative for years, and in the last few months, we have been in a position that we had to do it. So I think that's the impact in how we will see an organization, how we will conduct clinical trials over the world, how we will monitor chronic disease for patients at home, or on the way it will change the patient journey. I think it will be tremendous. And even inside our companies, we see that we are currently reorganize the way we invest, the way we work together, and I can't see that going back to what it was before. And as always said, we are probably entering in a new normal, if I can say. With that, and I think that's again, what we've seen and what we've learned was not really new. I think we knew for some time that the change was coming, but for sure it has been an incredible acceleration. For example, when we talk again about autonomy for Europe, or having a healthcare industry with some autonomy in Europe is probably something that will be seen differently by pharma company all over the world, whether you are a US, an Asian or European company, but still something on the table for further discussions. So COVID has been an opportunity to accelerate all of the items I just discussed. And for me, and I hope, as Jacques said, that it is a unique situation, but unfortunately we can't be sure that this is not only the first one of a new world, I would say, in which many other diseases or challenges could come, so that we should learn and keep the momentum. So at least with all the poor effect of that crisis, we also have some learnings that will help patients and healthcare organization in the future. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Christian. So now I think we've got a few minutes left. So any particular question in the audience you would like to ask the panel? And I take this opportunity to ask if there have been some questions in the chat room for those people who are online. Any particular questions? Maybe I will kick off with one particular question to some of you. Obviously, we're saying that COVID has been a catalyst for change, changing the way of working and so on. But any change in the original strategy, for instance, for Sanofi, for Servier, or for the other speakers here, does this going to change on the long run your final strategy execution, or any particular comments on this?
For Sanofi, I cannot say that there is a change or even a significant change in our strategy. I think the COVID was maybe a booster actually to speed up some of our processes and some of our program. Of course, if we put aside the vaccine piece, and we couldn't anticipate a vaccine like that a year or 2 years ago. But if we put that aside, I think the COVID period was much more a booster to what we are doing than anything else.
Olivier, you want to make comments?
Yeah, sure. Maybe a couple of specific comments more on the M&A side. I think we have seen a pause in activity, sort of late February, early March, when the financial markets were in free fall. But we've seen much more activity recently with Gilead going for immunomedics, Sanofi getting tempted by Principia, and as yesterday we had Bristol going for myocarditis. So just on the M&A side, I mean, it really looks like at the end of the day, the key drivers are companies' long-term planning, specific investment thesis, and the availability of financing. And so as long as we see these three dimensions remain fairly unchanged, which they have to date, I'm fairly confident that the pandemic should not have a deleterious impact on sort of transaction activity in our sector.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. It's always long to change a strategy when you are very large companies, but we have seen ourselves many small size or medium size companies raising funds, changing their strategy, pressed by their investors, by their shareholders to adapt themselves to the demand. Universal is a good example. Perhaps you could comment. They have changed partly that strategy, because to adapt themselves, because they had demands from the Gates Foundation or others. And I know many companies around the world push, to change their strategy, because to find funds and also to answer to demands coming from other companies having complementary expertise. So we have seen some good changes for many companies. small size or medium size.
Hugues, you wanted to comment, maybe?
Maybe while Hugues is trying to connect, if you... No?
Oh, yes, okay. Yeah, he's probably blocked there.
Can you hear me, Christian?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, yeah, well, thank you very much for those aspects. We've seen, and Laurent, you mentioned that, the recruitment were a little bit up and down, especially in oncology. And then we heard Raim saying that finally oncology maybe not so affected. Can you draw what would be, obviously it depends very much on each of the product and probably the type of indication as well. But can we have some lines, because we heard a lot that basically the other therapeutic areas who are not totally involved directly with COVID are going to, who are impacted. So any particular comments around those lines? Laurent, Raim, do you want to make any comments? No?
No, I think the biggest impact we will see on oncology will be more on the patient side. When you look at how many haven't been diagnosed during this period, that's where the biggest issue will happen. I think for the companies running trials, we'll find a way to manage if these things last for long. But that's where we should look at now, is how we handle the damage that has been done.
And do you anticipate that this can be a long-term activity?
Oh yes, I mean, if you look at the number of patients that did not receive the appropriate treatment for the past months, if you want to get back, then either you will have to delay some of the new treatment or delay the past treatment. So that's a real issue we need to take care of, and the healthcare system has to take care of.
Yes.
Can you hear me or not?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, no, I just wanted to answer the question you raised just before about strategic changes from big pharma in the near future. Answering for the layman, for all the employees, experts, and French patients, what I hope is what is one of the usual threats, I would say, for developing clinical studies or developing investing in France will be maybe decreased by this simplification and the pathways we've seen during this crisis, if we're able again to support and keep that discussion open with health authorities and so make our country more investment friendly, I would say, for big farmers. That we go back to what we were, which is number one in Europe in terms of clinical studies, production, and whatsoever. So for me, I see the opportunity as we have been able to move.
Yes, thank you very much. All right, I think we have just a few minutes left. So obviously there could be other questions, and certainly one of the biggest is, there is this vaccine risk, and what if the vaccines are failing? So how the companies are going to adjust to that? That's a broad question. Nobody has the answer, but certainly this type of question that some people have. Maybe I think just to, unfortunately, we are reaching to the end, so we have just a few minutes. So I just want to say that COVID-19 has brought major disruptions, really. We've heard from earlier presentation and certainly from Frédéric's one, obviously in R&D and obviously the delays in clinical trial, and now an emerging issue, which is the data integrity in those trials. We've seen that actually there have been differences between Europe and the US on this approach. The US trying to continue to recruit with an average delay of 3 months of clinical trials, while in Europe, actually, the studies were more or less stopped. But then the consequence on the longer run is that you have more and more COVID patients, including in US studies, and this has to be addressed in the future. We've heard, obviously, the impact on supply chain, the commercial activity, the fact that the reps cannot see the doctors, cannot go to the hospitals, financial impact. We've seen also all the figures. But basically, I think we've heard a lot of adaptability of all the big pharma, the small biotech. Everybody has tried to adjust to this situation, and with a great hope, I would say, in terms of a new opportunity arising. We've heard as well that M&A activities and certainly business development activities has probably shifted a little bit, but certainly not stopped, and will probably to continue. What the most striking aspect, which was really relevant in all the presentation, is the ways of working. Everybody has tried to think other ways of working, to think the way we collectively operate, the way we interact with key stakeholders. We've heard, some testimony around the regulatory bodies, but also between companies. There's been unprecedented collaboration between various stakeholders, and this is probably something that we should keep in the future. We didn't tackle so much about recruitment, how it was easy or not to recruit in that period, but I know that there are very mixed views on this topic. And there was one sentence, and it's probably you, Laurent, who said it, that actually the good people or the goods will be even better, and will probably win, and the less performant or the people who were less performant before the crisis are going to be even worse. So I think it looks like this COVID is a tremendous opportunity, a catalyst to be even better, to be more collaborative in the future. So that will leave us with this very positive, I would say, message that obviously out of all this, there will be probably something good at the end. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for your participation. And thank you obviously for the speakers for the time they had to prepare this and to share that with you.
Thank you.